So I guess when I was a little girl, I probably, because I can remember way, way back, like far. And so when I was a little girl, I must have been maybe 5, maybe 6. I was really tiny. I was really small. And I wanted to help my dad. My dad was already elderly. He died when I was 12. And I believe he was 72 at that time. He was in his 70s anyway. So, so anyway, and he didn't speak any English, and so I grew up with a lot of different ways of learning. A lot of some of it too was a little bit of sign language when he would play. The older people would play in the dark with us, and they would use the shadowing, okay? The like puppets, those kinds of things. So that's how I grew. When they would narrate, they would call it atsokanen, atsokewen, which was storytelling of long time ago, of the legends before contact, even creation stories, those kinds of things. So they would mimic, and but the stories were always told in the evening for our entertainment day, and so that's basically how I grew up. But people who raised me never had children of their own, so I was loved, I was secure, and it was a beautiful environment, a very safe environment for me. And I didn't start school till later on in years. They didn't put me in school right away. But anyways, when I was this little girl, I wanted to be with my dad. And I saw him outside. It was winter time, and I went out there, and he was sawing wood. And he used a bow saw, I guess, or a buck saw they used to call it. So there was this the sawhorse. So he had 2 sawhorses that he was sawing away in, and I wanted to help him. And so he said, yes, yeah, you can help me. And so I picked up that piece of wood that fell. As he was cutting, it fell. And I picked it up and I threw it. I threw it that way to my right. I picked it up with my left hand and I tossed it over to the right. And then he just stopped. He stopped with the saw. And he said in with the language, go pick that up and bring it here. So I did, and I went and gave it to him. And then he said, look at this wood. And he held it, and he says, if you look at it, he says, look at the bark, he said, and look at the imperfection of that bark. Basically, that's what he was telling me. So look at that bark, he says, and you see how crooked it is. It's all dented, and all these. So I was really looking at this tree, this little piece of log, this firewood. And he says, that's you. That's you. He says, that's what you look like, he said. And that's what I look like. He says, that's what Mom looks like. And he went on to, this is what people look like. He says, but inside this tree, he says, see that little soft spot? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, that little soft spot, he says, is your spirit. That's your spirit. He says, that's my spirit. That's God's spirit. He said, Creator Manido, that's him. And he said, what this tree did for you, he says, this tree sacrificed its life for you, sacrificed its life for me. He says, so when this tree lived at one time, and he said, but this tree gave itself up. He said, so you could be. So he said, so that you'll have warm water, he said, to wash your face. So that you will have warm water, he says, for hot water. He says, you'll have water for your porridge in the morning. That's what Mom's cooking, is porridge. So that'll be ready for you because of this tree. And he says, and when we go inside, he says, you'll feel how warm the house is. He said, and that's because of this tree. That's what this tree did for you, is doing for me. He said, is that it's going to warm us. That's the sacrifice this tree made for us to live. And he says, so when you look at this tree inside, you look at that core, and that little soft spot. He said, you have it, I have it, everybody has it. And he says, and don't ever forget that core. He says, because that's God, that's Creator. You go in there, he says. And then you look at the tree, he says, and you look at the rings. Can you see the rings? And I said, yeah. And then he says, well, the rings on that tree, he says, represents its growth, your growth. You grow. He says, do you know how small you were when you came to me? He says, and you kept growing and growing and growing. Just like this tree, look at how young it is yet. He says, it's a young tree, just like you. And he says, and that's why this tree was brought to you today. He says that this what, basically, I guess this is what would happen, that this tree sacrificed itself for my teaching and my learning. So that's how he taught me. And so he said, every ring represents its growth. Every ring represents a teaching on that tree. He says, just like you. You're going to pick up all kinds of teachings as you grow, as you get older, you're going to get a teaching. And each time you're going to get a ring. He says, that's how Creator teaches. He says, so the next time, he says, when this falls, he says, when it falls down, don't throw it. Because someday, he says, somebody will throw you aside like that. And is that how you want to be treated? Like that. So that's what he taught me. And I must have been like 5, but it stuck out to me like that. There was other things, that he taught me about the environment, and but I think that one was probably where I received my most learning about respect and about kindness. And, so I always try to walk with that piece and always in mind that how to treat another person is with respect. And there was this one time again, he took me on a I had to learn, at 11 years old, I had to learn how to pick rice. And my little brother was 8, he had to go. So he went with my mom, I had to go with my dad. So one of the things that he taught me was the environment, okay? So I didn't know I never seen him do this, at least I don't remember, but he had tobacco. And I was in the back of the canoe with my sticks, my rice picking sticks. And he sat in the front to paddle. But as he sat there, he prayed in secret, I suppose, and he put the tobacco in the water. And then he steered the canoe and away we went. But I couldn't pick the rice. And he tried to teach me, and I couldn't do it. And I could hear other people saying, oh, somebody's breaking that rice, just killing it, just destroying it. Must be a new one, they were saying. And sure enough, they would meet, and it was me. They wanted to meet who was destroying the rice. So those kinds of things happened. And then by 12 o'clock, my dad said, you're not a picker. He says, we'll go to the island, he says, and we'll switch. So we switched. So he put me to paddle the canoe. So I sat there, and he sat in the back with the rice sticks. And then he said, how is what he said. Okay, that's what how means. How means okay. So how? And I said, well, where do we go? Where do I go? And then he said, be still, bizana bin. Be still, be quiet. I sat there quiet, not knowing, well, when do we get going? Like, when should I paddle, and where do I paddle to? And then he said, so I looked behind the canoe and I asked him, well, Dad, where do we go? And he said, just be still. He says, be still. And he said, and let the water teach you. He said, let water show you where to go. He said, and let Nodin teach you where to go. He said, those are your teachers, not me. He says, I'm just sitting here waiting for you to feel it, to know where to go. They're going to teach you. So I sat there, I was like, I was mad because he's not telling me where to go, and so finally, after my little temper tantrum, sitting there, and he's not helping me to go, and then as I was sitting there quiet, pouting, and trying to get my way for him to direct me where to go, I heard the canoe, and I heard the wave, like the water slap the canoe. So I heard that, and then I saw where the waves were going. And then as I was sitting there, and I just sat there listening to the water, and I was watching the waves, and then I felt the wind. And so then I saw the rice how it was flowing. So I thought, well, okay, I'll go that way. He's not helping me, but I'll go this way. So I went in that direction, and then I heard my dad just thrashing the rice. Just going whoosh, 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 like that, eh? So those are some of the things that he taught me was to be still, and if you're still, You let nature guide you. You know, the water is there to teach you, and the water is there to help you and to feed you, all those kinds of things. But I was already 11 years old, and I was meant to start learning on my own, right? He didn't have to always feed me. So those are just like some of the stuff that he taught me, yeah.